Ukraine has seen this playbook before. The blockades, the relentless drone swarms. These are the very tactics Russia has unleashed upon them. Now, Iran is mirroring that blueprint in the Persian Gulf. Ukraine has had enough. After Iran shamelessly armed Russia with drones, Ukraine is seeking its revenge. And here's the kicker. Even the US didn't see this coming. Ukraine is making a monumental move to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, employing the very lessons it learned from humiliating Russia's navy in the Black Sea. Ties are rapidly forming between Ukraine and several Middle Eastern nations. President Volodymyr Zelensky himself has confirmed that Ukraine will be sharing even more of its drone expertise with its new Gulf partners. Following a recent visit to the Middle East, Zelensky revealed that the primary topic of discussion with every new partner he met was inevitably the Strait of Hormuz, and the tactics Iran has been employing to blockade this crucial waterway are desperate for change, and they need it fast. With the Strait of Hormuz choked off, they can't sell their oil and gas, which is having a catastrophic impact on their economies. For Zelensky, this visit was a strategic opportunity to forge powerful new partnerships and exact a measure of revenge against both Russia and Iran. Asymmetric naval strategy and the advanced drone technology that Ukraine has used so successfully against Russia in the Black Sea were major conversation points, Zelensky disclosed. The urgency stating, "We raise the issue because it's painful and hot, as we can see, for the whole world because there is an energy crisis. They know that they can count on our expertise in this area." Zelensky added that Middle Eastern nations have closely observed Ukraine's success in unblocking the Black Sea corridor, and they want the full details. Ukraine is sharing them, Zelensky affirmed, and in doing so, it's making incredibly shrewd moves, building alliances with wealthy nations that could provide crucial funds for Ukraine's ongoing war against Russia. The ramifications of all this are enormous, and we'll delve into them soon. But on the expertise front, no nation in the modern world understands better what it's like to contend with a blockade imposed by an aggressive power than Ukraine. On March 21st, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba labeled what's unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz as painfully familiar. He posted on X, "Russia did the same in the Black Sea, blocked maritime trade trying to strangle Ukraine's economy and achieve political and military goals. Indeed, Russia imposed a blockade around Ukraine's Black Sea ports almost from the very moment Putin launched his invasion. That blockade was somewhat different from Iran's. Putin had the warships of the Black Sea Fleet at his disposal, while Iran is using fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, and drones to create its blockade. But Ukraine felt the devastating consequences nonetheless. The blockade Russia created cost Ukraine approximately $20 billion in annual revenue, much of it from the grain that the breadbasket of Europe ships to buyers in Asia and Africa. But Ukraine found a solution. Utilizing ballistic missiles like the Storm Shadow, Ukraine began systematically striking Russia's larger warships. The subsequent development of sophisticated naval drones such as the Magura and the Sea Baby allowed Ukraine to conduct highly targeted strikes against Russian ships both in port and out in the Black Sea. Ukraine's relentless innovation means these drones have evolved to the point where they can even carry missiles and FPV drones themselves. Slowly but surely, Ukraine whittled away at Russia's once dominant presence in the Black Sea. The fleet that was so dreaded at the start of Putin's invasion has been chopped down in size by a third. Russia's warships have largely withdrawn from the Black Sea, constantly under threat from Ukraine's drone-based strategy. Today, although missiles still occasionally target them, Ukraine's trio of ports in Odessa are now visited by 200 cargo ships every month, Politico reports. This astonishing feat is possible because Ukraine has developed a complex, layered system of cargo ship protection built upon the offensive strategy it uses to keep the Black Sea Fleet at bay. What we see here is a proven blueprint for clearing the Strait of Hormuz. The Gulf nations bleeding money because of Iran's blockade are desperate to get their hands on that blueprint. Blueprint Zelensky confirms is being passed on. A flurry of new weapons agreements has been established through Zelensky's visit to the Middle East. Most of these deals involve Ukraine supplying weapons and defense technology that it developed specifically to combat Russia's Black Sea blockade and its drone swarms. Ukraine's president underscored the immense significance of this, stating, "All agreements that will be legally formalized are extremely important for our country. Ukraine has never had such agreements with this region before." So, While the precise details of these agreements remain classified, the Kyiv Independent reports they are currently related mostly to air defenses, with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates all having signed on the dotted line to gain access to Ukraine's invaluable expertise. Zelensky adds that these new agreements are designed to last for at least a decade and cover the export of Ukrainian weapons, including advanced air defenses, naval drones, electronic warfare systems, and specialized software. For their part, the Gulf nations are partially paying for these new weapons using energy supplies. We can assume a significant financial component will also be involved, providing a massive boost for Ukraine as its economy strains under the relentless weight of Russia's attacks. However, simply providing weapon systems isn't enough for Ukraine's new partners. They desperately need comprehensive training on the techniques and tactics required to deploy those systems as effectively as possible against the threat Iran poses in the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine has that covered. Expert groups from Ukraine have already traveled to the Middle East to share their invaluable knowledge with the Gulf nations that have become Ukraine's new partners. The leaders of those nations, along with their military personnel, are profoundly grateful to receive this experience, and Zelensky believes they should be. The Strait of Hormuz presents a monumental problem for the Gulf nations. Since the U.S. launched Operation Epic Fury, Iran has blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, leading to enormous quantities of oil and liquefied natural gas (LNG) failing to reach their buyers. Approximately 20% of the world's oil and LNG passes through this single waterway, and the economic shockwaves of Iran's blockade are reverberating globally. On the recipient side, nowhere is the shock felt more heavily than in Asia. According to the BBC, about 90% of the oil and LNG that passes through the strait is destined for Asian countries. Now that vital supply line has been severed. Even nations like China, which had prudently built up 3 months of reserves to cope with such a situation, are feeling the pain. Citizens there have faced a 20% increase in fuel prices, and China's stockpiles can only last for so long. In the Philippines, a national energy emergency has been declared, with daily wages plummeting due to soaring fuel costs. India faces a more unique problem. 40,000 million of its citizens are employed in the country's ceramic industry, which has been forced to shut down for a month as the Strait of Hormuz blockade shows no sign of lifting. At one point, oil prices surged to $190 per barrel, NBC News reports, a price not seen since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and the profound supply of oil. Supply chain issues that crisis brought to the world. Should the situation in the Middle East remain unresolved for an extended period, the shockwaves being felt now could be dwarfed as a systemic problem for the entire world rapidly develops. Russia's blockade of the Black Sea was painful for Ukraine and its grain customers. What we're witnessing in the Strait of Hormuz magnifies that pain to a truly global scale, pushing the world's economy to the very brink of oblivion. At the epicenter of all this are the Gulf nations. Working in unprecedented closeness with Ukraine, for them, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is an even more immediate existential problem because it means they cannot generate the income they rely on to keep entire nations functioning. We'll delve into that in a moment, but before we do, a quick reminder. You are watching The Military Show. If you haven't, as the BBC reports, the 20% of oil and LNG that flows through the strait every year amounts to approximately $600 billion annual trade. Iran is one of the beneficiaries of this income, and its blockade obviously doesn't extend to ships doing business with its regime. But for nations like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf states rapidly forging ties with Ukraine, that is absolutely not the case. Billions of dollars are being lost in trade that simply cannot happen because of Iran's blockade. So, The Guardian describes this as the worst nightmare for the Gulf state. Particularly because this is a problem entirely outside of their direct control. It was the US and Israel that launched operations against Iran. Gulf states are being unwillingly drawn into a conflict they desperately want no part of. However, they are also being increasingly hardened against Iran, both due to the blockade and because Iran has been launching missiles and drones into their territory. The sad truth for these nations is that they don't really have a choice. They're involved now, and their economies are bearing the brunt of the severe consequences. Yield News reports that the Gulf states have already lost about 1% of their gross domestic products, GDPs, in the month or so since Operation Epic Fury began. Al Jazeera reports that Capital Economics forecasts GDP losses of between 10 and 15% if the conflict lasts at least 3 months. That is a very real, terrifying risk, especially as signs increasingly point to the U.S. preparing to put boots on the ground in Iran, an action that could add weeks, if not months, to the Operation Epic Fury timeline. What was initially supposed to be a quick operation for the U.S. is looking like it will be anything but. And for as long as the Strait of Hormuz is blockaded, the Gulf nations must find their own solutions. They have come calling to Ukraine, and Zelensky has answered that call. This is a brilliant strategy for Ukraine, as you'll soon discover. But beyond the immediate financial incentives, there's another profound reason for Ukraine's place work. These new agreements allow Ukraine to exact some truly sweet revenge against both Russia and Iran. In addition to the blockade Russia attempted to create in the Black Sea, Ukraine has been pelted by drones on an enormous scale since Putin launched his full-scale invasion. Russia didn't possess these drones at the beginning of the war. They had to acquire them from elsewhere. Elsewhere turned out to be Iran. According to The Conversation, Russia is now almost at the point where it's able to build 1,000 long-range drones every day. And almost all of these drones are Shahed types or variants of a design that Iran licensed to Russia around 4 years ago. That's the crucial link. Iran didn't just provide Russia with thousands of drones. It did precisely what Ukraine is doing in the Middle East right now. For Russia to reach its current level of long-range drone production, it needed experts from Iran to travel into the country and teach it how to build those drones. Iran happily provided that expertise in return for deepening its security ties with Russia. There are now dedicated plants inside Russia solely for building drones of Iranian design, and the Shahed 136 strike drone, which Russia renames the Garan 2, is now a more common sight in Ukrainian skies than it is anywhere in Iran. We see this reflected in the sheer scale of Russia's long-range attacks against Ukraine. Russia deployed 5,059 drones against Ukraine, a 13% increase over January's figures. And in March, Russia capped off the month with a 20-hour series of strikes between March 23rd and 24th, which ultimately involved 948 drones. None of this would have been possible without Iran and its Shahed 1250 knowledge, and Ukraine is acutely aware of that fact. It will also be acutely aware that Russia is now trying to return the favor to Iran in the Gulf region. According to a report by The Telegraph, Russia is beginning to supply Iran with Garan 2 and Shahed 136 drones, meaning Iran is benefiting from the technological upgrades to those drones that have given them a range of 600 meters and a speed of 111, all in return for a mere $20,000 per drone. Ukraine knows all too well the devastation Iran's Shahed drones can wreak. It's now savoring some delicious irony as it turns Iran's own strategy against it. Iran's regime believed it could benefit from cozying up to Putin by providing Russia with the tools to harm Ukraine. Now Ukraine is cozying up to the very Gulf nations that Putin hoped to influence through his ties with Iran. And it's doing so by providing drones and expertise just as Iran provided to Russia. But Ukraine is taking it a step further. Iran's Shaheds are attack drones for which Ukraine had to desperately find an answer. Over the last 4 years, that answer has been evolving to the point where Ukraine has developed low-cost interceptor drones that collide with Russia's Shahed variants, taking them out of the skies long before they reach their targets. In February, more than 70% of the Shahed-type drones Russia launched at were neutralized by Ukraine's new interceptors. These drones cost as little as $150 to build, making them significantly cheaper than the Shahed drones Iran deployed and far less expensive than the anti-air missiles the Gulf nations have been using to counter Iran's drones. Ukraine is even developing advanced interceptor technology it aims to use to destroy entire swarms of Russia's Iranian-inspired drones. Under its new agreements with its Gulf allies, Ukraine may well share this groundbreaking technology, is what the Gulf nations are receiving from Ukraine. Expertise and advanced drone systems, including interceptors, will help these nations effectively counter the drone threat Iran poses in the Strait of Hormuz. If Ukraine also begins sharing the blueprints for its seafaring drones, such as the Sea Baby, the Gulf nations gain access to cost-effective weapons they can deploy against Iran's fast boats in the Strait. Combine all of that with the Black Sea blueprint that Ukraine created, which includes the previously mentioned component of creating layered defenses to protect tankers against attacks, and the Gulf nations acquire a ready-made strategy offering an asymmetric counter to Iran's tactics, while the U.S. tries to solve the Strait of Hormuz problem with sheer conventional firepower. The US never expected any of this. Hopefully, the US will welcome Ukraine's involvement, especially as the US President Donald Trump has implied that other countries must take care of the problem in Hormuz. Ukraine and the Gulf nations seem to be taking that literally, and the benefits for Ukraine's new Gulf allies are crystal clear. But now we return to the real genius of this deal that we mentioned earlier. Immediately, we're going to see Ukrainian drone technology and expertise heading to the Gulf, all to counter Iran's Strait of Hormuz threat. Remember what we told you earlier? Zelensky says the deals he's signing are designed to last for 10 years. Both Qatar and Saudi Arabia have already committed to these long-term deals. United Arab Emirates isn't far behind, The Guardian reports. It's here where Ukraine's true genius truly shines. The Ukraine war has raged for over 4 years. There appears to be no immediate end in sight. Putin shows no sign of wavering from his maximalist demands during peace talks. Ukraine handing over so much of its drone now means that it will be able to lean on its new Gulf partners for crucial money and defense supplies later. Advanced air defense systems that can counter Russia's ballistic missiles are a critical need. And we may start to see cooperative energy and defense production come into play as these decade-long deals mature. Ukraine is proactively setting itself up for a future where it is still a sovereign nation. And it's doing so by meticulously building ties with Gulf nations that have felt the indirect pressure of Putin's influence. Through Russia's ties with Iran, we now see a situation that virtually nobody expected. Ukraine looks set to be the unlikely winner of Operation Epic Fury. The invaluable experience it has gained battling Russian drones, many of which are developed from Iranian designs, has become a potent lever that Ukraine is pressing as hard as it can. Through this, Ukraine is showcasing itself as a far more valuable partner to Middle Eastern nations than Russia. That's according to Oleksandr Kryv of the Ukrainian Prism Foreign Policy Council, who tells Ukrinform, "Our experience is something we can trade for additional security and a stronger negotiating position. We are showing the world that we are a more interesting and valuable partner to Russia." Countries in the Middle East have historically maintained long-standing relations with Russia, forged numerous contracts with it, and essentially saw no one else in the post-Soviet space besides Moscow. That is rapidly changing now, even as he desperately attempts to support Iran as it is, battered by the US in Operation Epic Fury. Putin is watching Russia's influence in the rest of the Middle East subtly slip away. Nations that once relied on Russia for weapons, expertise, and security guarantees are now turning to Ukraine. What once were primarily trade relationships fueled by Gulf state purchases of 20% of the soybeans, wheat, corn, and sunflower oil that Ukraine produces has blossomed into something far more profound. That's dangerous for Iran. It's even more dangerous for Russia. In one of the most unexpected developments in modern geopolitics, a 4-plus-year invasion has led to Ukraine becoming a key power player not only in Europe, but increasingly in the Middle East. Still, we cannot ignore the fact that Ukraine's drone expertise will take time to fully implement, and the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked. The US, as shocked as it is by Ukraine's deepening involvement, has its own definitive plans for reopening the waterway. You can discover what those plans are by watching. Thank you for watching our video, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to Brief Update to catch more of our in-depth analysis of the geopolitics surrounding the unfolding crisis in the Middle East. And thank you as always for watching.